Morning, friends. Pleasure to be back here. And I'm delighted to see how this event is developing and shaping. And I'm grateful that all of you could find the time so much time to be with us. I looked through the agenda and I found that there were outstanding sessions. And I was not getting an idea if there's any space left for me to add anything. And I think all of you as customers are more than generous with your views, and you're sharing very openly what you're learning, and that's perhaps the most valuable thing for fellow professionals. So I was trying to create a space which could add on to what is being discussed. And so when we thought of this title, Sapnesh and I didn't quite know whether he wanted me to talk about our role as a global leader in talent development. And I said, that's too arrogant. But I did think that it's important for me to say this, that we would like each of you to build thought leadership in the area of talent development. You're already doing many things. So it would give us immense pleasure if we saw that our interactions with you in whatever little way can accelerate your own movement to become thought leaders and global leaders in this area of talent development. So I'm going to address 4 questions and my own limited experience around those. The first, this I look at as a board question. When you look at organizational growth and people's growth, and the board of any company has to deal with all stakeholders. And over the last few decades, the shareholder is getting the upper hand, and most of us, I think, feel that it's gone a bit overboard. So the board has to look at society. What's our role as an organization in society? What's the meaning? What's the purpose? They have to, of course, look at the people who are funding the venture, the shareholders. And then we say we exist for our customers, so we are adding value to our customers, which is why we exist in a sense. And of course, the people who make it possible. And over points in history, the importance given to people has gone up and down. So I'm going to put that question, which is a question that you should be pushing the board on to say, where does this start? And I'll have a few comments on that. And once we arrive at some position, then the second question is that how do we ignite the dormant desire? I'm using that word, dormant desire to learn and grow, because it's in the nature of the human being to be curious, to learn, and if those two things happen well, then we grow. So it's lying there, but it's completely suppressed by the way we've been educated systematically. And though it's a question of reigniting, so how do we? And I see this as a leadership question. If the first one was the board question, this is the CEO question. How do you do organization building so that you can ignite this dormant desire in people to grow? And so once we settle that, if we settle that, the third question is, where is the fountainhead of knowledge? And that's a question for all of us in this room. And this is a philosophical question. So we'll touch on where do we normally look for knowledge. And we'll talk a bit about that. And finally, again, a question for this team. And this is a managerial question. If the last one is for you a philosophical question, this is a managerial question. How do we go? And where do we go from here? And in this, what I'll do is, I'm going to talk about cases which have very little to do with what you do on a daily basis. But it's our experiences in other spaces, for other segments, for other parts of society. Because as Edward de Bono talked about lateral thinking, he said you get more creative sparks in your head if you look at unrelated activities and get some lateral thoughts. So 3 examples, which I think one of them may have been addressed by Vijay, or touched, or at least mentioned by Vijay. So there are 3 specific examples I'll talk about to trigger some thoughts. And hopefully there should be more questions in your mind than answers by the time we finish. I hope that happens because I'm here for the next 2 days, and I'd be delighted if any of you think you'd like to have some more time, and I'd learn a lot from that, and I'd be willing to share whatever we do. So let's go to the first question. And personal experience, our own personal experience, we put this document together, we call it our vision, but it's basically values, motives, and beliefs. We wrote this, Vijay, myself, and the other two founders, we wrote it in 1985 when we were 4 years old. And I don't want to go into the content except to say there are, in a sense, 4 chapters. There's the first kind of introductory sentence. I'll come to that in a minute. But then we say NIIT is people. That defines the rules by which we will engage with each other. That's the inner core. NIIT is quality and value. This is our relationship with our customers, suppliers, governments, whoever we engage with as an entity. And finally, NIIT is a mission, which is why do we exist? So what's our connection to society? But I want to touch only on the very first sentence because I'm posing that first question. And we start by saying that we, NIIT, and I could spend a whole day just talking about these 2 words. What is we and what is NIIT? But we believe that our growth is the derivative of the growth of each one of us. This is a belief. It's not a proven law, but it's a belief that the company will grow if and only if people grow. The reverse may or may not be true. We have extremely profitable companies where people don't grow. And our view is that's not sustainable. So in this equation of where do we start, we believe that we should start with the people. And why do I call it a board question? And why do I then challenge you to push your board to look at the stakeholders and the attention they give to different stakeholders? Is that boards are not giving enough attention to growing the people in the organization, because it tends to be a longer term return than the quarterly result. But organizations are stressed, organizations are on the edge because we are missing out the key point that if people grow, then organizations grow. So that's where you should start. And I want to just give one example of our own experience, that in 1992, we started a quality movement. And many of you probably know about Phil Crosby, or some of your organizations would have worked with him. He's the person who created the American response to the Japanese attack through quality, where Deming and Juran, 2 Americans, went and helped the Japanese to get better than anybody else. And then America had to respond. And Phil Crosby was the person who did that. Rose to become the head of quality at ITT under Harold Janine, the great leader. So we got Phil Crosby involved as we were thinking about our quality movement. And he had something called the Complete Crosby Quality Management System, CCQ, his experience of many decades of how to make quality happen. And it was a great journey, except that very quickly we found that we were imposing a process on people. And we figured it was taking a lot of effort to drive that change agenda, because it was not coming people outward, it was going system inwards. And so then we started quite early, in fact, end of 1993, we started working on what we called as the Personal Quality Initiative. And this was a movement, while the systemic structure got created in 12 months or 14 months, it took us 5 years to get every individual in the company to realize that as humans, we also make defects, just like a process has defects. And if as humans we don't deal with our defects, there's very little chance that the company will eliminate defects. So there were simple things. I don't have the time, but I'd love to chat later in the day. This is 6 years of enjoyable effort where we actually made quality a personal agenda for individuals. And we got people to mark their own defects and do fishbone diagrams and do Pareto charts and look at cause effect and go to root causes to do human development, to do their personal improvement. And this has sustained the whole concept of quality much longer than a systemic structure or a quality management process would do. So our own experience taught us that it's important to start with people when you have a large change agenda. Then people will absorb the systemic structures. And so last year in India, we got rated as the best place to work among Indian companies, even in a tough time. It's been a tough time for the middle class of India last couple of years. because of very high inflation, high interest rates. So the middle class, particularly in India, is very badly impacted. And that affects worker morale. But in such a period, for NIIT to get recognized as the best among Indian companies, to me, it's a, a testimony, should we say, of working on people as a starting point. So therefore, the first, the point I want to make in the first question is perhaps where you have to push your board, your responsibility to change the view of the board to saying that people, if you work on people, then the organization will take care of itself. So that's the independent variable, and organization growth is a derivative. So the organization growth is the derivative of the growth of the individual. And that, I think, the task of all of you here and the excitement that all of you face in your job is looking at your people and helping them grow. So that shouldn't be, what comes at the end of the budget. Okay, how much money do we have to spend? If you are cutting, where do the cuts come? So how to put the people issue back in the center, or how to make that in the list of stakeholders the very first one. I think that's a challenge, one challenge that all of us in this room have to work with. The second, this is a leadership question and a CEO question. And so here I'm just going to put a very simple framework of 4 words, and then I'll talk for a minute. So in organization building, when we are doing innovations in organization building, what should leadership be doing? So I just tried to summarize everything about building an organization into 4 words. So inspiration and aspiration. A leader's biggest job is to put a vision in front of the people, which is bigger than the vision of the people. So that's inspiring, and the aspiration levels of the followers rise. This is a very fundamental construct for leadership. You can't be a leader unless you have followers. And people will follow you if they think that by following you, they'll do better with their lives than they would do alone. And this is the space of the heart. This is the space of the heart. This is the space of emotion. So when you talk of making audacious goals, for example, when Kennedy said we'll take man to the moon and bring him back safely in 10 years, it was a ridiculous goal which people have said, come on, who's done it before? Not possible. And a lot of people said, that's what I want to do. I can't do it alone, maybe I can do it with this guy. So inspiration, aspiration, and maybe it'll find expression in the training programs you design for your leadership, but this is the first piece. This has to happen for a company to grow. Dreams have to be presented. And when that happens, I'd say the heart is warm. People then want to do something. They want to follow. And then you come to the next part. I'm using the word respiration. It's not for the lungs, it's for the head. It's about openness. It's about creativity. It's about ridiculous ideas where you won't be banged on your head if you said something and wouldn't be called stupid. It's intellectual space. It's intellectual. So respiration is that once you got an audacious goal as a leader, have you created that environment, then do you let your people run free? And so therefore the conventional mechanisms of teamwork, brainstorming, creativity, lateral thinking, committees, all of that good stuff is the stuff of the head. If the first one was the heart, which is getting people to say, damn it, I'm going to do this. If every employee in the company wakes up in the morning and says, I want to do great stuff, then the first part is okay. Now do you let them think freely? And again, a message to the CEO to build a culture where this is encouraged, that the stuff of the head, and therefore supporting free thinking. And finally, the rubber hits the road. So I think Einstein said 99% is perspiration, sweat. So if these 2 things are happening, then the real grunge happens, and bulk of the effort spent in an organization in terms of people hours is in the last box. And that is where it's the hand, the heart, the head, and the hand. That's where we do things with our hands. And the other way to present this would be, so this same thing as a learning construct, and this is terminology you people know better than I do, which is the issue of attitude, the issue of knowledge, and the issue of skills. Now, most of the education and training we do tends to go to the right extreme because that's where most of the hours are. But I think the criticality is on the left side. So if our leaders can be equipped to get the left-hand side to be active, there are fewer people we have to deal with as talent development people. There are fewer people in the leadership team where the left-hand side has to get active. And then there's the supervisors who create a work environment where people can be free, which is about knowledge, and I'll come to that in a moment. And finally, skills is where actually bulk of our effort goes, how to get people to run a process correctly. So in the industrial era, we captured that in the machines. The machines don't make too many mistakes, but humans do. So we tried in the industrial era very hard to get the human being out of the man-machine equation. That was the preoccupation. But that's behind us now. We are in the post-industrial era, and more people are employed working with another person or people than with machines. Now this is a very fundamental shift. But if I look at all of our education system, it's still geared to the industrial era, where someone has to work with the machine and better run the process and not fool around with it. In the post-industrial world, if I'm talking to another person, they expect a new idea. They expect me to be sensitive. They expect me to be focused. And therefore, I think the talk on trust today is so important. You know, we in the industrial era, we started to trust machines. We built machines that we could trust. But we ignored, and we tried to get the human being out, and then we had industrial strife and industrial relation problems and unions and so on, which was a confrontational view. With machines, we were friendly. We put all our investments. In this post-industrial world, it's back to the human-to-human equation again, and that's why I think issues like trust start becoming fundamental all over again. So I come back to this respiration part once again to another statement in our vision document in the chapter on people, and this is a rather outlandish statement made in 1985, which says that we recognize the necessity of making mistakes. But then it says, and it's taking when. So there's a condition. You can't just encourage people to go around doing mistakes all day long. When it contributes to learning, innovation, and growth of each one of us. So everyone in this room is already a convert. You know that the best way to teach people is to let them do something. But do we let them do something or not? Half the time we don't. We have incentives and we have disincentives. And so we don't create a free environment. So when we're looking at knowledge, which is where creative ideas have to find expression, we have to work on pushing the leadership team to create that space. And we have to train them. We have to educate our leaders to create this space. So that was question 2, which is the leadership question, which is looking at encouraging leadership to create an environment where people are free to think. And then we can build that capability on how to improve their thinking and so on. Now this is your first question for this team here, and that's a philosophical question. So where is the fountainhead of knowledge? Today, all of us are getting increasingly overawed by how information is getting organized. And I think yesterday Google agreed to pay 19 billion to buy WhatsApp. Google has a revenue of what, 8 billion? And the market value is 100. Facebook, my mistake. 4 billion revenues and 108 billion and 170 billion market valuation. So something is happening in this post-industrial knowledge society where we are coming to grips with how do you value information. We can value materials. The industrial era taught us the value of plastics and metal and so on. But we haven't yet learned in the post-industrial world how do you value information. So this is the new world. And in this world, Google has got a very interesting vision statement which will organize all the world's information. And all of us are actually beneficiaries of that movement. So if you're doing PhD pre-Google, you had to spend the first 2 years figuring out who's doing what in this world. Now it takes less than 2 months. People say 2 weeks. So how we do a PhD is changed. Because the first bit is figuring out about what you're trying to find a problem which no one has solved. You can do that in 45 seconds now. And then you are figuring out what else is other people doing in related areas. It used to take 2 years. So the world's information is getting organized. And then you hear the word big data. And basically it says that every one of us is generating tons and tons of data with a mobile phone. And if you haven't read a book, read a book called Code Hello. That each of us, we think we are keeping our secrets to ourselves. And the net knows so much more about us that we also have forgotten. So big data is about data getting aggregated. And analytics is about making sense of that data. So one view is that all the knowledge of the world is a cloud, and I can tap into it. And it's quite true. However, that is all the knowledge which is outside me. And I call it a philosophical question because what's the knowledge of the self? And I've got the brain and I've got the heart. It's the best images I could get. So the human mind, how it works is still a basic question mark. And how our emotions work. Someone made a very good comment recently. They said, in our ability to cope with emotions, we are in the Stone Age. We lose temper more than we did 10 years ago and then 20 years ago and so on and so forth. For example, so emotionally our development has not got attention. Intellectually it has the left side of the brain as we talk about. So there's a knowledge outside which is getting aggregated. But I, as the prime mover, as an individual in the organization, how do I engage with that? Why do I engage? Which of that knowledge do I engage with? That's determined by what's going on inside me. And that journey inward becomes very philosophical as a term, but becoming so when I was very delighted to know that we're talking about trust. That doesn't belong in the world outside. That's something which I have to do with myself so that I can earn your trust. Earn your trust. So knowledge of the self, as we get back into a post-industrial society where people talk to people, not to machines, then if I have to engage with you, how I engage, how I draw conclusions from what you tell me, unless I understand myself, I'm not going to do the best that's possible. So as the knowledge outside gets more and more organized, it's high time we start understanding ourselves very much better than we have. And I'm going to just put pictures of 4 people. I could put 100, and I'm sure each of you have your own choices. But people who have written very well on this issue. Benjamin Franklin, 18th century. His little book, if you haven't read it, I strongly recommend. He was a very unusual human being, but one of the things he did was very interesting in his 40s. He lived up to 80. Was that he started saying that, and he had made his money by then, and he was now saying I have to do good stuff, was to look at himself and say, look, when I deal with my environment, I make a lot of mistakes. I have many faults. And isn't it important for me to get rid of these faults if I have to be a useful person? And he actually identified 13 virtues, as he called them. And he made a program that he will deal with. He listed those 13 virtues, and he would mark himself on a defect if he made a fault. And he'd spend 1 week on each of those. And then he did 4 cycles in a year and became a better human being. Fascinating work and fascinating little book to read. And then a 20th century professor at Chicago who I had a chance to meet, he's written a book in 1993. I talked about the quality movement, Philip Crosby, December 1993, called Quality is Personal. It's again a very readable, very simple book. He is a professor, he passed away a few years ago. He's a professor in statistics. And he started looking at data. And he was involved in looking at quality. And he started working with an AT&T professional who was trying to become better at what he did. And he saw ways to use statistics for human improvement. And there's an interesting connect between the two, but both were talking about how to become better human beings, and therefore how to be more effective. So much more of an inward journey. And Mahatma Gandhi, many of you have heard of him. He taught a whole society to deal with most difficult issues of life and being oppressed peacefully. Non-violence is the phrase he created, and help our country get independence in a very non-violent way. It's a different issue that we had problems after that moment, which were religious problems, which he felt very sad about, but he caused a whole movement by inner strength and the power of the principle. So again, his autobiography, which is called Experiments with Truth, is quite an amazing read, because how do we get honest with ourselves? Which is again the same journey of, do I know myself or not? Truthfully. And this picture you may not have seen. He's one of the great philosopher, thinkers, Sri Aurobindo, and he's written extensively. And one of his little books called Living Within is an interesting read. I think is good raw material for the psychologists of the world and psychoanalysts of the world today. He just did all that work and thinking by spending time introspecting. So when we hear the words meditation, it looks like it's not for me, it's for someone up in the mountains. And just last week, I had a very interesting experience listening to the past president of Mexico in an IT convention in India. We have a body called NASSCOM, which is the National Association of Software Services Companies. And we have an annual event every year. We call it the Leadership Forum. And he came there and he spoke. And I'm just going to very briefly play this. It's about a minute.
That has to do with leadership. And first, we have to understand that we are all leaders, and that we're leaders all the time of our life. Leadership is not reserved to a few. What we have to do to become a real leader, and maybe why we don't have so many leaders outside in the world. And it's because we don't go within ourselves frequently. We don't do the exercise that is highly recommended by this nation that has on meditation and reflection one of its strongest assets. When you go within and you learn about your leadership, you learn about your capacities, you learn about your commitments, passion, compassion, love for others, then you discover that you are close to omnipotent, that you can do and reach the best of the dreams that you can think about. And that's what has guided my life. When I joined Coca-Cola to drive a delivery truck, I said to myself, this is just the beginning. The purpose is to be president. And purpose, as you know, is a very powerful word. Nothing in this life moves without purpose. So in that reflection, in those minutes that we must gift ourselves with every day in silence, we have to think about that.
So again, I guess the human potential, unless we tap into it, we will not know what to do with the knowledge of the world which is coming on a cloud. And in that sense, what I would really expect is that all of you and all of us think a little more deeply on this dimension, because we are getting busy looking at technology and how to get into the cloud, which is the knowledge of the world, but we are not spending enough time to think about ways to let our people bring out the best that they have. So where do we go from here? I am a bit short of time, so I'm going to go from here very fast. But I'd like to just leave this sentence. How do we think of building projects which have a vision and a mission? Not just deriving the skill gaps in the organization which come from functional managers who say, I want this to be done, so we derive skill gaps. So that's important, because at the skills piece, we have to make sure that people can do their job better. But to go a little upstream to the basic question of how do we create projects which, so I'm wondering, Vijay, whether you spoke about Highwell at all yesterday? So we have Dr. Mitra, one of the speakers tomorrow, who is our Chief Scientist Emeritus. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to skip this piece, but this is about how do we enable people who are outside the economic circle where people can do what they want with themselves. How do we bring technology? So these are slum kids and such. So I'm going to skip this piece because you'll probably see it tomorrow. But we created kiosks. So you can see children, you just build this kiosk, connect them on the internet, leave them where kids hang around in slums, in villages. And we've done this in many countries of the world. This is probably somewhere in Cambodia. This is northeast part of India. This is some part of southern India where no teachers, just good interfaces, connected devices, and kids who self-organize. You'll hear Dr. Mitra talking of this work and the joy that they experience in curiosity and learning, and therefore growth. This is a project we did at Bhutan, very little country, which is pursuing a very interesting goal of gross national happiness. They think that GDP is the wrong way to have gone, and they're waking up as a nation. They brought the youngest democracy in the world. They just had their second round of election. In the second election, they threw out the guys who were ruling in the first time, completely. So it's a terrific example of individuals expressing themselves. But they're on the path of looking at a developmental model which looks at national happiness rather than just domestic product. And we've had the good chance to be roped into, as the king said to us, or to me, to say that how do we jump from being an agrarian society into being a knowledge society by passing the smokestacks? So we are fascinated to be involved in this project. It has meant that we are dealing, so those are the two prime ministers, the Indian prime minister in the back. So it's a country-to-country project, and we've been given the responsibility to deal with 1/4 of the population and prepare them for the knowledge society. So we see this is the group of ministers, and here you can see another of my colleagues. This is the monks. The only guy in a suit is from NIIT here. But dealing with all sections of society, school children. And this is the prime minister at one of these kiosks with a child. And we call them playground learning stations. So it's outside the school. Kids love to run out of class all the time. All of us did that, right? So you take them to a place where they can have fun, but they learn. And this is the last piece I want to show, is something which we are doing for, which we started with. NIIT started preparing talent for the software sector of India. And we use the word demographic dividend to talk about the fact that our population, young population, is growing. We have this huge surge of young educated people. And the history of nations, we can see that every country has had its period of a demographic dividend. So our thing is, how do we engage our youth to learn? So this is the TV commercial, I think a minute or so, dealing with the whole thing of, the reality that classroom is boring and learning can be something else. So I'll just show you this. And
My daughter's not studying, and I'm so happy for her.
My grandson, he is not studying. Good for him.
My son, he is not studying.
We are so proud of him.
At NIIT Cloud Campus, I'm not studying. It's a new way of learning.
Excellent. Well done.
I learn from the best faculty in class and from experts across India.
I work with friends whenever I want. Discover the many new ways of learning at NIIT Cloud Campus. I'm not studying.
Call 1-800-102-6448.
So the insight here was kids don't want to study, but they want to learn. So can we think of a new way? So this actually takes 35 years of experience to put learning back, and I won't have too much time, but what in technological terms you could talk of pedagogical instruments, how to use technology, how to help people to assess, how to collaborate. So the best way in which all of us have learned how to put that back into a method. And this is something which is new, and we are implementing it for the youth, not just of India, but now in many countries. So finally, when I would like each of you to become a great leader and a thought leader, is to be able to combine some visionary goals for your organization, and then of course to go with a lot of zest. And then we know that technology today is making a huge difference at making possible things that were not possible earlier. So with that, I'll end this talk, but I look forward to many conversations over the breaks today and tomorrow. Thank you so much.